Aloha, friends. This season of the Voyagers podcast is brought to you by our friend Jonathan Udis, a realtor and real estate advisor at Maui Dream Properties. So, quick question. How's winter going? I'm not trying to be mean. Trust me, I'm cool with winter. Our guest today on the show is from the Arctic, but if you've had your fill of cold and dark winters, you might be thinking about relocation. Maybe a tropical island is in your future? If that's the case and you've got Maui on your mind, you'll want to go to MauiDreamProperties.com and drop Jonathan Udis a note of hello. Whether buying or selling or investing, Jonathan will help you navigate the real estate market on Maui because without exception, he serves his clients with passion, enthusiasm, and excellence. You can trust him to put you and your family's needs first. If you're thinking about moving to one of the most beautiful islands in the world, check out MauiDreamProperties.com, drop Jonathan a hello, and get started on making your dreams a reality. I'm David Glenn Taylor, and this is the Voyagers Podcast. Quick note on programming. A few weeks ago, I teased the next episode with Ben Gertzel to talk about artificial intelligence. Well, just as we were about to start that interview, Ben's wife went into labor, which is just a bit more important. So we'll be talking to Ben in a few weeks. After a week off, I'm proud to present this interview with the incredible Holly Nordlum. Cheers. You probably have noticed that I interview a lot of Alaskans on this show. I lived there for 15 years, and some of the most talented and resourceful people in the world call Alaska home. I admire Alaskans because in order to thrive there, even in the big city of Anchorage, it takes a level of toughness rarely required in the lower 48. That's the endearing name that Alaskans use for the rest of the country. The long, dark winters and all the trials they bring are a common bond that unite Alaskans, no matter where they meet up in the world. But there's another level of understanding to be had of a land that has been home to people for over 10,000 years. It's easy for me to talk like Jack London or Robert Service and laud the incredible grittiness of the people who carved out a living in the mountains and valleys, but the truth is, there are those people who have never seen the North as a tough life, but just life. In fact, a good life, with the land and sea and perhaps most importantly, the ice providing what is needed to thrive. Alaska is home to 231 tribes of indigenous people. Like most native people, they've spent the last few centuries fighting to maintain their cultures, their languages, and a way of life that was shaped by the landscape around them. I spent most of my career working with indigenous tribes around the country, and in Alaska, some of my oldest friends are members of these tribes that date back thousands of years. And I can barely fathom that. I mean, just think about that for a second. How far back can you trace your family? I can make it a few generations before I need a DNA swab and a computer to help me figure it out. So this place that we think of as raw and untamed and untouched, it actually has hosted families dating far, far back. Before Christ, before the Roman Empire, before even the most ancient of stories in Greece and beyond. So it's not an empty wilderness. It's been full of life and stories and holidays and celebrations and sorrows and seasons. It's been called home far longer than anything that you and I can understand. My guest today is one of my favorite people. Holly Nordlum is an Inuit artist from the Northwest Arctic in Alaska. We met in college while we both studied graphic design. We have the same birthday, and honestly, we hit it off from day one. Since then, she's been leading a reclamation of part of her heritage, and it has gotten the attention of the world at large because it speaks to a deeper, more important part of our collective American heritage. The work of restoring what was taken without permission, and the work of healing the wounds that were left in the wake of that taking. I mean, obviously, we can't talk about your career and then the work that you've done with the Inuit tattooing project, and without really talking about why and when did it first start for you? When was your first kind of inkling that this was needed, that it was necessary, and was that a very personal decision for you, or were you looking at your community and saying we all need this?
So I think it all started when I was very little. I didn't know her, but my great-grandmother had traditional tattoos. My mom, of course, grew up with her. So that was something. And then we had photos of her. So,
and this is up in the Arctic?
Yeah, in Kotzebue.
One more time, say that again. That's the name of Kotzebue in Inuit language,
Yeah. So that was its name for many thousand years. And then some Russian, German guy named it Kotzebue. So I've been pestering my people to think about changing it back like Utqiagvik did.
Right. Utqiagvik was Barrow. And
right.
Now it's using its traditional name.
And there's some inner fighting about how to spell the name, but who cares? At least it's an Inupiaq name, right?
Right, yeah.
Getting back to my great-grandmother, my mom she's named for her identically. So Sucklin Lucy Schaefer. In those days, right, you took on that persona. And my mom's always feel very connected to her grandmother, who's my great-grandmother. And then when my mom was in her 20s, she had actually signed up to go to AIAI, but then this happened.
Then
she didn't go.
This very awesomeness.
This happened. Yeah. So my mom's artist and wanted to go to art school. So I feel like that led into me doing that. And then my great-grandmother and her connection to her, being named for her, started this journey in my head. And I remember in my teens talking about getting a traditional tattoo. I had no concept if there was anybody out there doing them.
What was the drive though? Like when you were in your teens, why? I
think about 15, I started like the pro-native Holly stuff. I started speaking about the issues. I was at AFN when I was 15, and I spoke about alcoholism and alcohol effects on teenagers. So it really started. I was Eskimo dancing too, Inupiaq dancing. So I was part of the group, and all that kind of formed my art practice, really. Of course, I do graphic design, but even now I'm doing graphic design that's specifically Native Alaskan, right, which has always kind of been my niche. Last minute and Native Alaskan.
Just under the deadline.
Yes.
I remember that.
Well, I always get these calls of last minute. We need something in a week, Yeah.
So, and once you're known as the person who can do that,
I know that's all I get, which is great because I'm a procrastinator, so it works fine. As an adult and working after we graduated college at UAA, I was in graphic design and photography. Artwork often calls out the issues, and you can see that piece behind me.
Yeah,
it's
the tiling piece there.
Yeah, it's made out of beer bottle caps, thousands of beer bottle caps, and they come in all these amazing colors. But it's a portrait of my cousin Kim, who I grew up with like a sister, and she died of liver failure because of alcohol, right? She drank herself to death. So, and there's trauma and there's historical trauma and all kinds of issues, but alcohol is what actually killed her, right? Constant not coping with what was happening in her. Well, I think what happened was in her past. But so I've done portraits like this over the years that speak about my family and how alcohol has affected me, because it's still an issue.
Yeah.
But in calling out all the issues all the time, you're so negative, right? Like, this is an issue. This is an issue. This is an issue. Sexuality is an issue. Blah, blah, blah. Somebody asked me recently, I'm in a book of significant Native artists, and they asked me my birth year. And I was like, no, I don't give that information out because, not only am I brown, but also I'm a woman. So then you're kind of insignificant after a certain age. So I was like, I don't give that out. And I said, I'm sorry, everything has to be an issue with me. Everything.
Nothing easy.
My birth year is an issue. Right. It's all, So calling out all the issues, and I remember talking to you about this. I wanted to do something positive for my community.
Yeah.
And I've been working in education here at the school district in Anchorage for years, working with Native kids in arts, and then with the university to retain Native kids who come out of the village. And that's something, but it isn't on an individual level, right? It doesn't really make significant change, I don't think. So when I thought about traditional tattooing and what it would do for me, I mean, I was 42, 41 when I got my traditional tattoos. I could logically and think about what society is like right now, and how we have to walk the world and what it could possibly do for me.
Right. Yeah.
And then hoping that if I started this revitalization of traditional tattoos in Alaska, that we could do it responsibly and then do real good on an individual level. That's like sitting down and counseling or laughing or crying or whatever you need to do with the client to hear their story. And this brings me right back to Kim. Hear their stories and help them process some of that trauma.
Right. The tattoos it's a ceremony. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, Inuit don't have the whole Sundance ceremony or whatever, but we can take a moment to be grateful and process and know our ancestors are there and helping us. Right.
Yeah.
Even if it's just in our blood, even if you don't believe in the spiritual aspect of it, it's running through your blood. So like being able to connect with that and then walk away after a therapy session with these beautiful markings, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I had hoped would happen. And then of course it's been crazy and amazing. And every day I get to do it. It's just amazing.
It's not just Alaska Native women. Now, you see Native women from all over. You were talking about coming to this tattooing conference in Hawaii on the Big Island.
Yeah, in Hawaii. And then, we were in one in New Zealand, and there are Native women, indigenous women everywhere tattooing and reclaiming. It becomes a reclamation of body and you're facing the world. So you're constantly reminding the other people, the white people, that you're still there and they can't discount you, right?
That's what I wanted to ask, if you could. Can you talk about like why it went away? You said your great grandmother was the last one that you knew in your family.
Right.
What happened?
Yeah. So it's a common story, and I'm sure. And I went to high school in Hawaii, so I know it's similar in Hawaii. Colonization by religious groups is really what happened, and then conformity, right? Western assimilation. I mean, that was the goal, right?
Right.
The goal was to come to Alaska or Hawaii, take the resources. And I mean, we were a nuisance. Brown indigenous people were a nuisance.
Yeah.
So not only did they look down on us and our ways as like savage, but then they also wanted to take and just discount us. That's the same story here in Alaska. Alaska is real interesting because I think it was a Seward's agreement that split up Alaska. Like they took a map of Alaska and they had religious leaders there, and they're like, Russian Orthodox,
they each got a village.
Right.
The Monrovians get over here.
Exactly.
Everybody kind of divided.
In Kotzebue, in Kikikdalrok, it was Quakers.
Okay, wait, like they like each like a monopoly in each village.
Exactly. So they just like circled regions, and it was like hubs, right? Like Kotzebue's a hub, Kikikdalrok's a hub. So then they were like, oh, you get these villages, the surrounding villages.
Right.
So you are all Quakers. And then in Nome, they're like, you're all Catholics,
how did we ever think how did we ever think that you could do that? I think
so. It was smart in a way. It's really smart. You're attacking spirituality, but also they ran the schools, right? Or the educational systems, and sometimes the towns, like the city government. So they really ran everything. So to not conform was putting your own family and your own kids in a disadvantage.
Right. Yeah.
And there were people who did not conform, but then they're at a disadvantage. They can't function in the system, the new system.
Right.
Ernestine Hayes from I love her so much. She's an author from Juneau. She's Tlingit. Wonderful, amazing story. But she speaks in her book, Tao of Raven, about this and how imagine being an American now. And let's say just because they're powerful or they have but Russia decides they're going to come over and we have to conform to their money system, which we've never seen before, and their language, which we've never heard before.
Yeah, it's unthinkable, right?
It's unthinkable.
Yeah.
And this happened to my great grandmother, right? That was that time. And
This is early. This is late 1800s, early 1900s.
Yep.
Right at the turn of the century. Yeah.
Yeah, they had already been coming, but that was the turning point to really put the pressure on them. The Seward's Agreement and all the things added up. They started making it illegal for kids to not go to school. So parents were then in trouble if their kids didn't go to school. Often their kids were forcibly taken and then sent to boarding schools because if your kids had to go to school and your village didn't have one, they were sent away. And that's my mom's generation. That's not even, she's 70.
Yeah.
That's not even very long ago.
No,
so.
That's interesting. In Alaska's history, compared to the Native American history in the lower 48, which was, the Indian Wars between 1860 and 1890, but the 1800s were dominated in the lower 48 by those disagreements and those battles and those
exactly broken treaties, blah blah blah. Yeah, exactly. Resources, taking resources like crazy.
Right. But Alaska was really, I guess, late to that game because of its its proximity. Right. I remember reading books by some of the native leaders up there. Willie Hensley wrote that book, 50 Miles from Tomorrow.
Yep.
And it's
I saw him yesterday or day before yesterday.
Oh, how's he doing?
Great. He's got long gray hair.
Does he really? He grew it out.
Yeah. So he's my grandmother's little brother.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So half brother. But I said, what happened, Tata? He said, COVID.
Well, he was always so well kept, and that's interesting.
Said, how'd you even recognize me? Because he's wearing a mask. I'm wearing a mask, and I could just see here.
I heard him talk one time, and he was talking about how the native leaders and during this debate of whether they would become a state, and how he's in the room, and it was so fascinating to hear these first-hand accounts, right? Yeah. He said to the audience, we had a choice. He said, we could have become our own nation. He says, can you imagine Alaska with our own money, our own our own government, control of our own resources.
Right.
And I remember the time going, it was another one of those things where, maybe my white man brain was like, wait, what? Like,
I know.
No, we've always been part of America,
I know. Yeah. It's
and
crazy.
he was going, no. We were in the room making choices. You know what I mean?
Yes. And think about that. Right. Like he was 24, 25, and 26 years old when that was happening.
Yeah.
24, 25, and 26.
Amazing.
Like I was in DC as a 8-year-old speaking about Native issues. Right. And I got, when I was speaking publicly, I got choked up. I was like, those guys, my uncles, and that whole group of guys that came down and kind of had to find their own way right through college. Most of them didn't, like military service, whatever. They had to kind of maneuver their way. And then they're asked to represent us all at 24, 25, and 26.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
unbelievable.
Yeah. It's crazy to me. I think I had all these same ideas and these same feelings when I was 15, 16 years old.
Right.
I mean, maybe you're purer when you're younger, right? Your intention is more pure. You're not so jaded by conformity and assimilation and oppression.
Well, you haven't had time. You also have this. You have no concept of time, right? So you're still, everything's in front of you, and
you're invincible.
Yeah, exactly. My middle son Noah, he's about to turn 15, and he's.
Oh my God! It was his in the picture with the
pink suit.
In the pink suit. Oh my God!
That was all his idea.
Oh my God!
That was all his idea. He comes in one day and he's like, "Dad, I need to order something on Amazon." And I was like, "Okay." And he's like, "Can you mind?" And I said, "Well, what is it?" He goes, "It's a suit." And I was like, "What?" He's crazy about this girl. He's just crazy about her.
God. So cute.
So he came, but here's the coolest thing, right? He's like, "It's Valentine's Day, and here's what I want to do. I want to take her to a nice meal." And I was like, "Okay, great." And he goes, "And he's going to dress up." And I was like, "Okay, that's brilliant. I support all of that." He goes, "Can you help me find a restaurant?" I said, "Yeah." So we found a restaurant, the Grand Wailea, which is another one of the big resorts, and booked that restaurant for 4. Man, they looked amazing. And then of course I was like, well, I better bring a suit because I'm going to drive them over to the Grand Wailea. So I need to be wearing a suit when I drive them, I don't want to be rolling in board shorts.
I thought it was like a dance or something. I just assumed.
No, that was all Noah's creation, the entire thing. He did it all on his own. We didn't prompt him. It was all his idea. It was freaking brilliant, man.
The cutest. So sweet.
But here's what's interesting about him at his age of 15. He is wrestling with just deep questions. That's what happens. Their brain, you get that age and you start wrestling with deep questions. And this is one thing that I always most of my career I spent in Alaska Native or Native American communities. You know, I
Right,
was
right,
in
right.
Gallup, New Mexico, around the
Right.
Navajo people. Most of my students that I was teaching at the school were Navajo students. You know, then I was in a lot of Alaska Native communities in Alaska. There is a stark, like you said, a reclamation that's needed, and it's right there. It's like
Yeah.
we can do this because there were tangible things that were taken away.
Yes.
Like
I mean, every day. Every
yeah,
day.
like
The
traditional
people are
dancing and all the things,
exactly.
the
But even
cultural aspect.
lands. I mean,
Yeah, and land.
with
Yeah,
Trump selling the Anwar, right? Like
right,
that just happened.
right,
Like
right.
selling leases to Anwar. Dude, like that's out of our hands. Like
Yeah.
you're taking that out of our
Right.
hands.
I know that it's interesting, the whole debate, even from the state's standpoint on Anwar, and it's all, you know, it's our thing. And should we drill? Should we not drill? And everybody's talking about the caribou.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about the new people and going, well actually,
This
there's humans,
belongs to someone.
right? There's been humans living there for 10,000 years. I'm like,
But we're just gonna drill it.
they're
You
just going to
worried
drill
more
it.
about
Yeah.
the caribou. That's because the caribou have people with money, right?
Yeah.
Like all the organizations that are supposed to do that for us are more concerned with survival right now
Right.
than they are about. It's
So
a tough time.
I'd love to hear a story or two about when you actually have given these tattoos to women, and what some of those, you don't have to use names if you don't want to or whatever, but
Well, I'll
what
use
those
names of people
experiences have been
like,
like.
well, I could tell my own story because that's great.
Yeah,
That's a good
please. Yeah.
Yeah. So once I decided I wanted to revitalize, I got funding after some convincing through the Polar Lab at the museum. And they were willing, thanks to Dawn Biddison, who works for the Smithsonian there on contract, she helped me kind of organize a plan. I mean, the whole intention of getting funding and getting people trained was that I would get a tattoo. Because when I looked for someone to do it, it was an issue to me that there was no one doing it traditionally, when that's the best way to do it. Like now when I tattoo people and they get a hand poke tattoo or a hand tattoo, they're like, I can never go back to Western tattooing because the machine just does so much destruction at this
Right.
time, while it does it.
Yeah.
And then you can't even talk to the person. Or when you're hand tattooing, you can chat up a storm, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like I put the design on and then I can just chat, cry, laugh. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so quiet. It's a real opportunity. But my story is that the whole intention was that I wanted them, right?
Sure.
And I had quoted my mom saying that back in the early days when I was thinking about this, and my great grandmother, that my mom said, "Oh, I would totally do that." And it just resonated with me. And I was getting 40. I was getting to the age that we had talked about, that when her and I talked about it. So I wanted to do something. Also, I wanted to do something for my community positive, which is what I was talking about. So I got the funding, and then I had no one to train us. I was working with Jake Scrivener. He is the best tattooer in Alaska. So, I mean, one of the best. He's amazing. He had done Yari Walker's tattoos.
Yeah, she was like
10
one
or
of the
15
one of the first groups. She
one of the first in
inspired a
the
lot of
city.
people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He had done her tattoos and he was like in his 20s when he did them.
Right.
But he just got it. So I worked with him a lot on health and safety. And I knew we had a plan to do this apprenticeship and find women, but I had no one to train us. My dream was to find somebody to train us who was Inuit and already working, right? I just put it out there, and we did find somebody to come, and I committed to 3 years with this person to really hash it out, pay her for her time, travel, and help me select these people. And her, I, and Jake really did all that.
Sure.
We came up with a plan. We apprenticed in Jake's shop for health and safety reasons and kind of how a Western shop works. Not too much because we didn't want it to run like that, right? Then we were able to spend a month with Maya and really hash out how to do it. And we were tattooing every day. And then she was in town and she was like one day, she knew I wanted them. So a couple of days before she left, she said, "I think tomorrow we'll do your tattoos." And I was like, whoa.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I had that moment oh, am I ready? And I was like, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's just do it. I'd never drawn them on.
Right.
I'd never done anything to prepare myself. But part of the process when you're getting the tattoo is you draw them on. And when we drew them on, we drew my great grandmother's tattoos on me. And I was like,
the same exact tattoos.
Yeah, the same exact tattoo. And
wow.
I was like, at the time, I didn't really have the whole history. Then I looked at it and I have this white man bulbousness to my chin. I didn't even know it was there until we drew them on. And I was like, why is that line is wavy? It doesn't really suit my face.
Yeah.
So then we started drawing on other lines, right? And then I was like, I think it needs to spread out a bit. And this is
Sure.
just visually, this is my art
Yeah.
background, right? I'm just like
Right.
visually, it's kind of bulbousy. So like if we
Yeah.
spread it out, it might look better. And then we had solid lines. And I was like, Yari and I are the only two Native women
Yeah.
working in schools all the time. We're both short. We look nothing alike, but we're both short. People aren't even going to notice us. They're just going to call me Yari. So then we did the dots. So there was no like spiritual or number of kids or number of accomplishments. It was like trying to find something visually that worked with my face, which is considering the time that Yari and I are the only two going into schools all the time. We didn't want to look identical. Now it wouldn't be an issue. Now there's so many women, it wouldn't be an issue. But back then it was just her and I and two other women in the city.
But when you say back then, you're talking about 7 years ago?
6 years ago.
6 years ago. I mean, that's, I guess I find it kind of fascinating because this thing really, it's like you hit a nerve. Like you really hit a nerve, and all of a sudden it became, I mean, it's New York Times and doing,
I know. We've been amazing and lucky. And I mean, the New York Times is great, but I was like, how many Inuit people did that reach? You know what I mean? Or the NPR story that went national. I was like, but surprisingly, people reach out. Yeah. Like, I mean, from all over Nashville and blah, blah, blah. I saw the New York Times, I'm Inuit, and I've never had any connection to my family. I was adopted out. I get those stories every day.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing. I know. So it's very powerful. So even though I'm like, New York Times, whatever, but like,
it's only the most powerful newspaper.
I know. They did a really amazing job. It was Ash Adams who.
Yeah, Ash did, and she wrote it too, right? She wrote the
album. She wrote it too. Yeah, she did an amazing job.
Fantastic. The photography is beautiful, and it was so funny for me to open up that article and see my friend Holly just on the New York Times. I was like, whoa, that's amazing.
It's great. I love it. But, sitting down every day with young girls and women who are processing trauma, and that's the real powerful shit, right?
So is that the kind of more typical process, is that when they're doing that, it is part of it? There's a healing thing that's beginning?
Yes. Well, over COVID and even before, when we were training with I had Allison Keller come in. She's a medical doctor who served as a primary care provider at ANTHC, who had been studying tribal healing for all that time as well, and other healing practices and all kinds. She's been all over the world. She started doing more tribal healing, and then she was at ANTHC and South Central Foundation in tribal healing. Well, then she kind of left that and is doing her own practice now. But I had her come in the early days and speak to us about touch and processing and having that energy and protecting ourselves, kind of training us how to do our best job. But over COVID, I hired her because I got the Rasmussen Fellowship, hired her to train Sarah and I. So we spend a day a month, the last 6 months, 7 months, just with her, figuring it out, kind of talking about the issues, getting resources.
Right, because it's almost like a form of therapy that you're issuing.
It is.
A little bit,
it is. And then you want to do your best. Like, if you think of it like therapy, you can't invest too much without spending for yourself. So how to balance that is what we're learning with Allison.
Two things that I really want to ask about. One is, did you guys figure out what, historically speaking, where the tattoos, where they began, or how they began, or why they began?
That's so hard. We have evidence going 11,000 years back. So
11,000 years?
11,000. I held a piece of a mask, a female mask, that had the tattoos on her face.
Oh my goodness.
With the archaeologist, it was for another project I did with Nathaniel Wilder. And it was just amazing, the stuff that, I'm doing graphics, but I get to see these amazing things like that piece. That mask, that's 11,000 years. They had it carbon dated, and
unbelievable.
I know. And then the tools, we get tools all the way back, and they were treated preciously because they were supposed to do this amazing thing. But if you look at all societies, there is a real strong tradition in most societies of tattooing for celebration, right?
Yeah, marking the times.
Exactly. The Vikings, all indigenous people, the Hawaiians, like, it's about marking both spiritual, wartime, like everything. The cool thing about Inuit tattooing is it was done by women, mostly for women, but there were men too, men leaders who were celebrated and went through the process. And that's something I'm working on now, is training Trevor. That's been amazing.
Wow.
He's so young. He just turned 21. He's
Yeah,
so young.
Andrew's gonna be 22 in
I
April.
know, isn't that
It's
crazy?
blowing my
Remember when they
mind.
used to go to
Yeah.
their birthday parties?
Yeah. Yeah.
So cute. Chubby
Andrew's got a
little
big old
boy.
beard. He's got this big.
Oh my God, you're
Crazy beard.
kidding.
Yeah, he
That's
lives in Virginia. He's going to school out in Virginia. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trevor was in Texas going to flight school, and then he came back.
Yeah.
And now he's here. And just, we talk about Native men a lot.
Right.
All the revitalization in Inuit territory is being done by women.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I was just thinking that. I think, though, like Black men, Native men have it very tough.
Yes.
The way they look, the way they have to kind of navigate the world, is tough. It's tough. Their roles are lost. Alcohol's always there. They have trauma.
Yes.
Like Native men it's hard. And then we have this toxic US masculinity, right? Other countries too. But here it's so tough to not talk about your feelings, not process emotion, and mask it all with drugs and alcohol and partying. And I think it's a tough thing to be a man of color in the US. I just watched there's something about Bob Marley, and he's saying, living in the US would be hell. I don't think people hate me, but I think the US men hate me. It's all cool, but I don't want, I wouldn't want to live in the USA. Like,
that kind of nicely leads into my other question was, I am assuming that you've had an experience or two in which over the last 6 years in which white women have come to you and they want to do it.
Right. That's something you and I talked about quite a bit.
Yeah. And because I remember when I first really started to study and read on Native culture, there was something calling to me that was very deep, where it was saying, I found that for me when I went back to Scotland, you know what I mean? And I went to the Highlands where my ancestors come from, and I started kind of feeling a little bit of that. But so what do you do? Like, how do you deal with that when someone who's not Native comes to you and they just want that feeling of belonging as well?
I always say, look at your own culture.
Right.
I always say, look at your own ancestors.
Right.
Like tattooing, like I said, most people did.
Yeah.
Back in
the
tribe
Scots
days.
did. Yeah. You go back to Scots, all the way back to the pig culture.
Exactly. Germans, everybody.
Yeah.
So just go back to your own culture, figure it out. That will mean more to you than taking from a culture that, that you want to be. It'll mean more if you just look at your own self. I say that to everybody. Yeah. So we have Native people who want Inuit tattoos and they're not Inuit. Sure. And I'm like, that doesn't really do anything for you. You're not connecting to your ancestors. Right. Let's figure out what your tradition is. Let's look at bead patterns or artifacts from your tribe or something else we've been doing is we did India, Alaska, and we do a lot of press. I do a lot of press about appropriation.
Right.
Giving this to anybody is detrimental to our healing. It doesn't make it, right? If I'm giving it to a non-Native person and they're walking the streets, it doesn't give us the power we need. It doesn't remind people we're still there. It doesn't help in the healing process for us. It's just another taking. Luckily, I have all these avenues to speak about it openly. So it's like here in Alaska, it's become pretty common. I don't get those many questions anymore.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I get a lot of press here. So that's nice because then I don't even have to explain. But people from out of state will be like, my brothers and sisters are all Yupik. I'm non-Native, but my dad adopted them. Can I get them? Sure. And I was like, no. Let's look at your own culture. Right. It means nothing for you to take from your brothers and sisters. Let's look at you, Let's celebrate you.
Right.
And I do tattoo non-Native people, but I do Alaska inspired for them. I don't take our patterns. That's crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating.
So, also, some people do it anyway, but I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And that's something you and I talked about early days.
Yeah.
I was like, they can do whatever they want and they can live with that. And there's that story of the woman in New Zealand whose husband was Maori and she was non-indigenous. He decided without talking to his tribe that she could get the tomoko. They can barely live in New Zealand now.
Oh, that's tough.
Which it's tough, but I mean, what did she expect?
Yeah.
And this comes back to my sister-in-law. When we started this project, she wanted them. And I was like, I'm sorry, were you sent to boarding school? Did you lose your culture? Did you have to learn a new language and this money system? She drew it on and then she liked the attention she got. And I was like, oh, what? You're just losing the whole point if you think that's what it's about.
And there is to an extent, as a fellow white person, where because we've been so going all the way back to when white people started coming and immigrating, where we have lost touch. I remember going to Scotland the first time, just finding a level of comfort that I didn't know existed.
Exactly. And connection, you think it,
Yes.
I mean, we just have no idea until you're in those places and exploring yourself, the amount of connection you'll feel. I always say to people who are sitting with me, getting ready for a tattoo, I say this all the time. I watched this thing on Facebook, I don't know, 5 years ago, but it was about like 1970s monk. And he said, we pretend we have free will. We pretend we have all this stuff because that's what we're told, right? Our society tells us we have this will, but we are only the product of our ancestors.
Yes.
So the decisions and the life we're living is because of those dreams, those wants, the trauma even, right? We are the product of that. And when you go back to a place, you can feel it. I mean, it's undeniable when you go back to your place. Yeah.
I've heard stories and I've read stories about people that have gone to a place and discovered something inside themselves. If you're an Alaskan, and we talked to Lael Wilcox a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, fourth generation Alaskan, her family obviously came up during mining and
right
gold during the gold rush and that kind of thing. There is a certain amount
opportunists.
Yeah, right. And they definitely were, right? In fact, like so many of those great Yukon stories were all about pioneers and opportunists and that kind of thing. That's why I think it was always a head scratcher for me whenever I was around Alaska. I remember going with Angela Cox up to Barrow. Yes, and I can't, I still can't do it. I've tried, man. I tried to do that. I know. The way it's that you roll.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Utqiagvik.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Thank you. Yeah, it's in the back of the throat. You got to. It's back there. That's a harder one for me. But I remember going up there the first time, and I remember her saying, "Oh, it's so good to be home." She said,
"Yeah."
And
isn't she? She's a wonderful human being.
She's amazing. She's incredible. I was with a photographer. We were doing a photo shoot up there because this is when they were getting ready to build a new hospital, and we did all the branding.
Oh, okay.
I developed all the branding for the hospital, and we had been flying in, and we were coming in, and if the vast majority of our audience has never been to the Arctic, probably never will be in the Arctic, and but you have no concept of space like that. You know what I mean? You just don't.
I know.
It's so vast, and so there's so few people and villages that are up there. But when you get up there, and she says, "Oh, it's home," and I remember looking at her and kind of getting that total sense of like, "Oh yeah, like this is home. This is home," and like there's But my photographer was like, "Oh, why would anybody ever live up here?" And I remember going, "They've been up here 10,000 years, man."
Exactly. And now we have global warming. It's quite lovely.
I know, it's turned into this paradise up there. Oh, as soon as a nice white sand beach just develops, we'll be on our way.
Yeah. People, I've heard like public defenders like out to drinks with friends, and then like hearing a friend of a friend say things like, "Why do they live up there?" And she's the one responsible to defend them, right? And I'm like, why?
And that was the thing, is that the question he was saying, that the statement the photographer was making, that what she was saying, the idea that anybody would have to defend that it's unfathomable in your brain, and you can't. So when people go, like when you're talking about Anwar and drilling in Anwar, and somebody says, "Well, of course, the oil's there, we got to drill it," and these people are going, "My ancestors go back 10,000 years here. What are you talking about?"
That, you're like taking things out of the ground. We've had earthquakes up there. That's there's stuff happens to the world, the earth. When you take stuff, stuff happens. Yeah. It's detrimental. But when you get to the core of things, like we're here as Native people, and we're trying so hard to preserve, right? Yeah. And the system is trying to take.
Well, this is like a full circle thing, because it goes back to the beginning when you said, when you enter a protesting space and you say, "I'm going to make this part of my life story is going to be about resistance," that you do have to have a thing that goes, how do I offset all of that intense negativity and the conflict that brings about, because it's a real thing. And that for you, this has been that It's been this beautiful kind of healing part of that.
Yeah, you just always have to balance. And that's something that Allison has kind of instilled in us as well. You know, our tribal healing trainer.
Yeah. What's her name?
Allison Kelleher.
Allison
And
Kelleher.
she owns, oh my God, I did her logo. It's so pretty.
Oh yeah. What's the name of the place she owns?
Snow Creek Medicine.
Snow Creek Medicine. Okay, cool.
Yeah, she's amazing. I love her so much. And she talks about balance. She talks about neutrality and balance, and how important that is as somebody who's giving the opportunity for somebody to heal. Always being comfortable in a positive space and neutral when somebody comes in. I'm not that great at it yet, but I do try to make it, you know, an open space to discuss whatever they want to.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I say that thing from that 1970s monk all the time. We pretend we have free will. We pretend that we are making decisions intellectually, but to remember and to trust that you are only the product of the people who came before you and your ancestors. I think that can be so freeing. Like when I do big face tattoos, I just chant that in my head because it's coming through me. I'm not willing it. Right? It's just a process that's coming through me. It can be very freeing if you trust that. Yeah. And I love that. I love it. Every time I say it, it gives me tingles.
Beautiful. See, look at that. We just did the Voyagers podcast. Done.
Yay. David, I better go. I love you so much. I can't wait to see you in person.
Yeah. I seriously miss you. Yeah.
And your fam.
I will. Thank you for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it.
Love you, man. Love you.
I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. The Voyagers podcast is produced by Sugar Sled Productions in Kula on the island of Maui. It's hosted by me, David Glenn Taylor. My wholehearted gratitude goes to Holly for coming on the show. You can read that article by Ash Adams in the New York Times by Googling New York Times Holly Nordlum. It's a great read, and the pictures are lovely and really tell the story. The music you heard today was by Inuit artist River Flows, with a Z at the end. I've placed a link to his music in the show notes, and you can find his work on iTunes as well as Facebook. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. It's really appreciated. You can support the podcast through Patreon by going to VoyagersPodcast.com and clicking on the Patreon link. And if you'd like to sponsor, like Jonathan Udis, email us, david@VoyagersPodcast.com. Next week, we're getting into a tough subject, parenting. Like many of you, I've got teenager on the brain. My wife Maria and I sat down to discuss the challenges, and then we consulted with Dr. Timothy Stewart and his wife Mona, friends of ours who are on the other side, as they say. They dished some well-earned wisdom on the challenges of parenting and raising kids who are self-aware and ready to take on the world. It's a raw conversation, but an important one. That's next week on the Voyagers Podcast. Mahalo for listening, friends.